Hey party people, it's Adrian, and I wanted to tell you why I decided to learn Spanish. I've made a commitment to learn Spanish. I am going to see this through because I really want to be able to talk to people in everyday conversation. My talk today has 3 parts. Firstly, I'm going to tell you about Spanish classes in school. Secondly, I'm going to tell you things I learned in real life about learning and using language. Thirdly, I'm going to tell you how I got inspired to get serious about learning Spanish. In high school, I had to pick a foreign language. The choices were Spanish or French. I could have chosen French because it's part of my family's heritage, but Spanish is the second language in the US, and it seemed the most useful. I went to college early, and I had to continue taking Spanish to get credit for high school, and there's a foreign language requirement in college. So I continued, but my progress was slow and frustrating because of the gaps between the classes, and classes just aren't very fun. I even switched to Latin at one point. It's a very interesting language, but it's so tedious to study. I'm sorry to my Latin teacher to say that, but I switched back to Spanish. I graduated. All right, so after college, I realized that I wasn't able to have a conversation in Spanish. 3 or 4 semesters in college won't help you do that. Would I ever be able to learn more? Would I have to take a class or do some kind of online course? It seems like learning a language requires you to study like you're in school, and there's a beginning and an end, and you're going to reach a certain level of competency, and you have to have a certain amount of talent and put in this time on a schedule. With work and then later having a kid, I put that off. When would I ever be able to do that? But over time, there were a couple of things that I learned. So I started putting together a lot of concepts about learning and using languages. You have to use it or lose it, right? I mean, that's kind of obvious. Why would I put all this time into Spanish classes just so I could forget later? Well, that made a bigger impression on me when I learned how people can forget their first language. There's a concept of language attrition or language erosion. You can check out a New Yorker essay by Jenny Liao called Forgetting My First Language. So her parents were Cantonese, and she knew the Cantonese language from China when she was a kid. But over time, her school and her life was in English. And so over time, her parents never really learned English, and she forgot Cantonese, and as an adult, she has trouble talking to her parents in Cantonese. I think I forget English words sometimes, but it's probably not because I'm getting older, but probably because I haven't been in school a long time, reading all these complex books and articles. Anyway, another thing about language is that it changes over time. I had a neighbor who was born in Germany. She moved to France and got married. She came to the United States, and then her everyday languages were French and English. She told me she was no longer speaking German after 30 years of not speaking it because it had changed. I had heard something similar from a fluent Russian speaker who felt he was not as up-to-date or fluent as he used to be after some time. I also learned that there are different methods to learn a language. You know, it used to seem like there was some perfect sort of class or course with the right pedagogy and the right order of learning words. No. So I found this video with a TED Talk. It's by Lydia Makova, called The Secrets of Learning a New Language. And she talks about the different methods of learning a language that polyglots use. So really, her point was that the enjoyment is key, regardless of method. So I started thinking a lot about how would I enjoy learning Spanish? You know, all the studying and memorizing was no fun. So I kept thinking about that, and I also had to find my inspiration. All those things I was learning about language were happening at the same time over the years as I was being reminded of my failure to properly learn Spanish in the first place. For example, when I started working as a lawyer, I would have an occasional Spanish-speaking client. We would have someone interpret for us. But I thought back over all those years since I took Spanish classes, I didn't do anything to maintain or improve my skills so that I could actually speak to that person. Another thing going on was that our state and our community were getting more and more Spanish speakers. My life went through some changes and I moved to a new neighborhood and we found ourselves surrounded by Spanish. So I would hear Spanish in the parking lot, on the playground, in Walmart. We got junk mail in Spanish. We were getting internet advertisements in Spanish before I ever put any Spanish on our devices. I would end up actually using Spanish. There might be a three-way conversation and one person would speak to the other person in Spanish and I would understand it. There was a lady who didn't speak English and I tried to speak to her in Spanish. It turned out she spoke Portuguese and that was kind of funny, but it actually worked. We ended up with more friends and neighbors who spoke Spanish. I realized that I actually have a couple of Spanish speakers in my family. And there's this moment that really stands out in my memory. We had some friends over to catch up, and then some neighbors came over to join us. And there was this moment where people were speaking Spanish in my living room. They knew English and Spanish, but at that moment, Spanish was the language that they were comfortable using to get to know each other. And I realized I live in a bilingual community. And I was thinking, wow, I should be able to understand them, and I've done nothing to build on this investment of time that I made in Spanish classes. So back to that notion I had, that learning a language means that you're going to continue using it. The question for me was like, do I want to make Spanish a part of my life? Well, now that question was answered for me because Spanish is a part of my life. The question is, do I want to keep ignoring it or do I want to actually learn it? So the question is, how am I going to actually learn it? It's kind of funny that some people would talk about, oh, you could go to a Spanish-speaking country to help learn the language. My response is, I could just open my front door and talk to a neighbor if I was bold enough to do so. And there is an interesting viewpoint that the United States is a Spanish-speaking country, and I'll give you a link to that. It's on a channel called Spanish Input. It's very interesting. But you know what? I just jumped into learning something. There are language learning apps, right? I don't have time to do anything else. So I started using apps and going through some lessons. I started getting a word of the day email and using a notebook to write things down. And that wasn't much progress, but I was establishing some daily habits, these really small habits that would help me learn. Are those atomic habits? Is that what that term means? Anyway, I saw that there were videos on YouTube to teach you Spanish. Some of them would write words on the board and talk about things in English and give you Spanish. But you know what was a game changer? There's this whole notion of comprehensible input being used to acquire language. So there's a difference between memorizing words and memorizing rules and then putting it together in your head and practicing versus listening. Listening is more natural. It's what a child does. The child learns grammar in their first language before they ever go to school to learn grammar rules. So, there's a channel called Dreaming Spanish, and I'll give you a link to that too. They have lots of videos. They start with videos with drawings and very simple stories, and in like some other channels that do comprehensible input, they work up to more conversational videos at intermediate and advanced levels. And so I'm kind of at an intermediate level now, but I'm not ready to really start talking quite yet. There's a theory that says that maybe at around 1,000 hours of comprehensible input, you could start speaking, and I'm not there yet. But you know what? With this whole notion of comprehensible input, I've also answered my question of when am I going to have time to learn? Because I thought, oh, I'll need to schedule like an hour to talk to somebody online, like a teacher, and have to pay them money. Well, if I'm just learning by listening, I've been taking maybe 15 minutes at lunchtime, 15 minutes after dinner, maybe in half an hour before bed, and I've put in an hour. And yeah, it would take a long time to get to 1,000 hours, but you know what? Back up to that notion of being dedicated to the language, and I'm going to continue using it. I'm going to continue using it no matter what level I'm at. So it may take a while to reach a milestone, but I'm enjoying a lot of Spanish videos right now, and I will continue. One day I'll work up to the level of watching news and TV shows, and I think I'm almost there. But that will just continue. So I don't worry about the milestones or the schedule or the deadlines. It's just something that I enjoy. So thanks for joining me and listening to me explain why I am inspired to learn Spanish. Should I come back with another video to explain how language education is broken? You could leave me some comments on that. You could also let me know what words to use to explain to people why you might want to learn another language to connect and communicate better with other people. Well, anyway, take care. Have a good one.